be muted during the presentation. Please submit your questions by typing them in using the question section of your panel that should be on the right-hand side of your computer screen. I'll ask these questions aloud to Judith and Joe after they finish their presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact GoToWebinar support directly at 1-800-263-6317. Okay, so now that the housekeeping stuff is out of the way, let me tell you a little bit about our presenters. We're very excited to hear from Joe Comerford this evening. As you all know, Joe is the Executive Director for National Priorities Project, and she's in the process of transitioning out of that role. She'll tell us a little bit more about that later. But for the past 6 years, Joe's responsibilities at NPP have been to build organizational alliances and to act as the primary spokesperson. And here at WAND, we've been privileged to host Joe several times on webinars, and she's made the budget completely understandable for us. So we've been very thankful to work with Joe these past few years, and we'll definitely miss her. And then next we will be hearing from Judith LeBlanc. Judith is the Field Director for Peace Action. She coordinates efforts on campaigns to cut military spending on nuclear abolition and opposing the war in Afghanistan. Judith is the grassroots organizer extraordinaire, and we've also been happy to host Judith on several webinars in the past 2 years. And lastly, I wanted to introduce Jasmine Tucker. Jasmine is new to National Priorities Project. She is a research analyst there. She focuses on leading research on the President's budget, federal spending, and tax policy. And before she came to NPP, she was a fellow at the National Women's Law Center. So with that, I'm now going to turn it over to Joe Comerford. Joe?
Thank you so much, Adzi, and thank you all for joining us. This is our first training of trainers, and I know I speak for Judith when we say how excited we are to be moving this curriculum to its intended purpose. So before we get started, I want to especially thank the Women's Action for New Directions, Women's Legislative Lobby, and Adzi Vokiwa for your unbelievable solidarity. And I am not being able to show my screen, Adzi, for some reason. Let's see.
Oh, no, we can see it.
You can?
Yes.
It's not moving, though. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Wand and Will. So, you know, when NPP and Peace Action wanted to do a virtual training of trainers, the first partner we phoned was Wand and Will. As you all know, Wand and Will are just steadfast allies in our common work. And so this trio, if you will, has made this evening possible. So we're really, really grateful. Of course, we're also grateful to the Colum Foundation and the Pentagon Budget Campaign. Now, one of the reasons that we created Move the Money was to be an active partner within this entity called the Pentagon Budget Campaign. We wanted to help ignite a grassroots movement to cut Pentagon spending. And we thought that this training that would actually be done a little bit different than all of our other trainings to date would be an incredible addition. And we've been very moved by the progress that we've made and the support that we've had by both Colum and the Pentagon Budget Campaign. So how did we come to do this training called Move the Money? Well, it's come out of actually quite a long arc. And I really want to recognize Judith and Peace Action's role in this, as well as a number of other wonderful partners, national partners and regional partners that we've had. We wanted to broaden the base of folks who were able to tackle Pentagon spending. We wanted to enlist the solidarity of new partners from labor, communities of faith, folks of color, economic justice folks, environmentalists, believing that, in fact, everyone has cause to want to tackle Pentagon spending. And so if we could create this training in a way that would make sense to a greater diversity of people, we would be doing a service for all of the things that we care about. So thus the roots of Move the Money. We also wanted to do it in a way that was much more participatory. We wanted to engage folks, have a little bit of fun while we tackled this. And so we enlisted the help of terrific trainers who were really well-versed in some of the techniques that you'll see illustrated in the training. And then we created some goals for Move the Money. So why do it? So clearly, in broadening the base of folks invested in cutting Pentagon spending, we wanted to explore how the Pentagon fit into all of the struggles that Americans care about, both with regard to federal spending and revenue. So we created the training with that in mind. We wanted to help folks connect the local, state, and national budget dots so that an entity working at the local level for a budget override, for example, could see how their work was intimately tied to Pentagon spending. We wanted to help ignite a larger narrative, a Move the Money narrative. Judith will talk more about the roots of this work, right? We've seen economic conversion work for decades now, and we wanted to really reprise that. And there are terrific people in this space already, like Miriam Pemberton from the Institute for Policy Studies, who are really looking at this larger narrative of moving the money, Pentagon money, to meet unmet human needs at home. And then we also wanted to make sure that we were really concrete in this training, and we gave folks who took it local, state, and federal ways to take action immediately following the training. Certainly there are hubs. There are many, many hubs these days to get connected with at the national level, but that's not the only place that you can take action in our larger goal to cut Pentagon spending. So we wanted to make sure to provide concrete outlets, whether it's a city council resolution, a state bill, economic conversion bill, or some of the federal work that's happening, especially right now, around the National Defense Authorization Act. And finally, we wanted to make sure that our allies in the field really understood the many ways that you can use NPP's work to both build awareness about the federal budget in general, Pentagon spending in particular, and then help bring it home through some of our engaging tools. So those were the major whys, the major goals behind Move the Money. So with that, I'm actually going to flip my screen now so that you can see the curriculum that we created for you. And Judith's going to take us deeper, but I'll give you a broad overview. And then after that, we'll look at NPP's website proper, and I'll take you on a little bit of journey towards some of the interactivity. So here we go to the curriculum. Now, this is on NPP's website. You can see the URL, nationalpriorities.org. You can get here right from our tool bar. You can actually go to our work and click down to analysis by date, and you'll get Move the Money, which is right at the top of the screen. You can also click our work because it's the most recent. You can click our work, and you can go down to military and security, and you can get to Move the Money that way as well. So here it is, Move the Money, and it will also be on Peace Action's website. So you can certainly access it there as well. But it's up right now on NPP's, and you can see that we have a celebration of the partnership that helped bring this together. And then I'm going to move quickly to resources. Now, what you'll need to know is actually really at the top of this. We have a training curriculum. This training curriculum was written, again, with you in mind, with folks who might take it and use it for your own purposes, whether at the local, state, or national level. And then we divided the training materials into two parts. One are training materials for use during the training, so the things that you're really going to have to know about if you want to do the training, and then, of course, these background materials. In fact, we've added to the background materials for the last couple of years, so it's really a rich compilation. So let me just take you in quickly to the training curriculum, and here it comes. And you can see it here on your screen. And Judith, again, will take you into the logic of the training, why we put these modules together. Let me just give you a bird's eye view. So we have some of the thought behind the training up front, our goals, personal goals as facilitators, some tips here. And then we move into acknowledgments. Many, many people helped shape this training. There were first, in fact, listening groups and allies in the field that helped actually tell us what we had to include if we were to do the job as effectively as we hoped to do it. And there are many, many people in this group to thank. And then we get down to a welcome. We have different ways that you can welcome those in attendance. We have a piece around framing and introductions. What is the best way that you can set the stage for those who have come to the training? And we have two sample introductions here, one on the shorter side, one on the longer side. As a sidebar, we've noticed that, in fact, the training, the commitment to the training is a day-long training, and sometimes that is difficult. So we've tried to actually put this into module form so that you can take the pieces that are useful to you, and we've grouped them as such. After this, we begin chipping away at federal budget priorities. And there's a mixture here. There's a mixture of the MPP staff person at the training, and going forward it will be Jasmine Tucker, and that's why it's so wonderful that Jasmine's with us. She was with us recently in North Carolina where we did the training, and she's just a tremendous addition to NPP's team. So there's the beginning of federal budget priorities, and we have a PowerPoint that you can use. We have a video that you can use, actually an animated tax video. We have an interactive exploration of where your tax dollar went and all of the associated things necessary with that. And then we move down to the PowerPoint, as I mentioned. And then there's a piece on racial equity. Now, we understand that all people, no matter race, class, gender, sexuality, age, have a stake in our common work to understand and take action around Pentagon spending. We start first with racial equity because the disproportionate impact of the federal budget on communities of color is so profound that we've tried to really articulate that in a piece around racial equity. And then moving from racial equity, after we've helped welcome and understand who's in the room, we go to a deeper understanding still of federal budget priorities. And we raise these things called elephants in the room. And this is where our partners in the field, like Coalition on Human Needs and Friends Committee on National Legislation, were particularly helpful. They helped pluck these out for us so that we could get smarter. And from there, we play a little bit game of Budget Jeopardy. And Jasmine was the host in North Carolina, and just wonderful. And we are able to then reinforce some of the facts that we've just brought from the earlier part of the day in this game. And after that, and you can see there's quite a lot of Jeopardy rules, but we can boil them down for you. Then we actually go to something quite interesting. It's the great debate. We ask the provocative question, is this possible? Can we actually move the money from the Pentagon and still create some good-paying jobs? And people have done unbelievable work in the field around these debate questions. And then we go actually to something actually very, very, very participatory, where people create a slogan or a spoken word or some sort of elevator pitch around this. And again, it's a crystallizing technique here. And then there's a robust opportunity for action planning. And thanks to Judith, we have a defense transition scenario that people get to dig into. And then actually there's time for participants to really ask their own hard questions and talk with themselves about what's next in the field. And then we have, of course, a closing and an evaluation. And I would say that these evaluations, we're taking them very seriously, and every time we do the training, it actually gets a little bit better, which of course is good. So we'll warmly welcome you doing your own evaluation and helping us make these materials better and better. So let me move from there to just giving you just a peek. I just backed out of the training curriculum. So here are the training materials, and the training materials are both here in this section, and they're also appendices, depending on whether or not they could fit neatly in a Word doc. And you can see them here. These are the things incorporated into the training, and they're listed in the order that you'll need them for the training. You can see they take the form of, as I said, the PowerPoint or the video or some of the materials for doing the penny poll on taxes, or the actual Jeopardy setup, and on and on. So they're here and they follow in this. And then just as I mentioned, these background materials that I won't click on, these background materials do the same thing. They tie into different elements of the training, whether it's more information about military spending or more really great tip sheets from Peace Action around taking action. And then following here, you can see the Move the Money appendices. And again, these links will just take you to the things you'll need. And we finish it off with a sample training agenda. Of course, this can be customized if you want to swap around the modules and or trim or put it over 2 days, expand it or trim it. Either way, it's actually all possible. So with that, and we'll certainly take questions on these after Judith also talks about the logic of them behind them. I just want to take you to National Priorities site. So I'm flipping my screen. So this is just nationalpriorities.org. This is the view that you'd see if you click on the website. And there's just a whole host of information here that actually would either help you localize the training. So if you're going to do it, for example, in Washington State, we have Washington State-specific numbers available for you on the site. Let me just give you a quick preview. Budget basics. This is often the first place people go. This is complicated stuff, and on top of it, it's polarized in Congress these days, and then on top of that, of course, the media is having a difficult time because it's so hollowed out, reporting this accurately, so it's really tricky for folks to hang on to. So we've got a Federal Budget 101 section, and we've got other things that you could potentially take hold of in this. Our work section, this is actually military and security. If you were to go here, would give you a whole bunch of information, up-to-date information, whether it's a comparison of the current budget proposals in Congress or some more FAQ information on Homeland Security. We've got it here in this military and security piece of the website. But I want to focus for today on interactive data. One of the places that people will go first when they come to NPP site is, of course, our trade-offs. And here, actually, in our upgraded trade-off section, we have the collective spending of 9,900 cities and towns in the nation, every congressional district, every county, and, of course, every state. So if you were to go to, for example, Connecticut and want to see, and you were going to do a training, and potentially you would want to understand some spending out of Hartford, Connecticut, we could give you what the citizens of Hartford paid for the Department of Defense in 2014, our current fiscal year. Taxpayers are going to pay about $78.75 million for just the baseline Department of Defense. And you can get all of these kinds of trade-offs just by customizing them, the total spending. And then you can actually move down and say, okay, so all right, $78.75 million, that's a lot of money, but I don't really understand what that means. What does that mean for me in Hartford, Connecticut? And here's actually where you can add trade-offs. You can look at this in terms of the number of Head Start slots, the number of actually health care for kids who are currently low income, elementary school teachers, and on. You can see the list right here. So you can actually begin to mix and match. You can say, oh, we need in Hartford, we know that we have a deficit, for example, of, say, 3,000 kids are eligible for Head Start but not yet receiving it because of not sufficient funding. And we can see that that actually costs about $23 million, so that you could potentially say, well, let's see, we can get these 3,000 kids for 3 years, and we can see that, in fact, we could get 3,000 kids Head Start slots for 3 years and still have $9 million left over. So you can do that. You can add trade-offs so you can potentially, you don't have 3,000 kids, you have fewer, or you don't want it for 3 years, you want it for 1 year. So you can continue to add and create something that's really meaningful to you, hopefully, and helps you bring these, as an organizer, bring these numbers home to your constituents. These are very, very large numbers, and it's almost impossible to fathom them, even for folks who are in them waiting around day after day. Another place you might want to go is the cost of national security. These are counters. They're embeddable, and they're also localizable. So, for example, with the Department of Defense, I can actually localize this. So I can say, I'll go to Hartford again. I'll go to Connecticut, and I'll go to Hartford, Connecticut. And I can tell the people in Hartford, Connecticut how much they're paying per hour. So that every hour, taxpayers in Hartford are paying $9,078 for the Department of Defense. That's just baseline Department of Defense. So we can do that. Again, we can do it for the same 9,900 cities and towns, every county, every congressional district, every state. These, of course, are sisters, if you will, together, the trade-offs and the counters. You can see the spending by hour, and then you can actually trade it off so that we can understand the magnitude and meaning of these very, very large dollars. Again, if you have something that you want to explore, if you have a particular interest of a location, that's where MPP comes in. You send an info request to MPP, and we can see if we can create a customized trade-off for you. And the last place I'll go, because it is actually very, very personal, is your tax receipt. So if you're interested in getting the average taxpayer's receipt for your state, you can get it here. And this is what the average taxpayer in Connecticut paid in federal income taxes in 2013. So it's $18,988. Again, that's just the average federal income tax payer in Connecticut. You can also run your own taxpayer receipt down here. You can invite people to run their own taxpayer receipt, and maybe you would want to do that after the penny poll. And you can see that of that 18,000, 5,000 went to the military, and our military category includes war, and then we break out some subcategories like nuclear weapons, and then we break it all the way down through our budget categories. So, for example, education, of that $18,385.70 went to education. That's all federal spending on education, and that's $3.08 for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is funded in that larger bucket. So we have just bunches more tools here, but those are the three ones that actually have a particularly intimate tie to the Move the Money training. We update these all the time. We'll also bring online something actually that's going to be very, very new for NPP, but you'll be able to actually print out your state's relationship to the federal budget. That's coming soon thanks to Jasmine and our colleague Becky. So you'll be able to, again, if you're in Connecticut, you'll be able to print out a fact sheet that will tell you all the federal contributions to your state budget for a given year, whether that's more or less than the year before or the national average. You'll be able to look at city-level contributions, some of them, direct spending to individuals, some grants in form of contracts to businesses. You'll be able to look at Pentagon versus non-Pentagon contracts. And that's coming online, again, thanks to Jasmine, later on this summer. And certainly we'll make sure that all of our partners in the field know. So with that, I'm going to turn it over so that we can move on. Thanks, everyone.
So we are about to move on, and I am going to try to find the PowerPoint. So sorry. There we go. All right. So I'm really glad all of you joined us tonight. This training of trainers is the first time that we're doing a training of trainers, but it really is about really increasing the capacity of local organizers and activists to skill up at the grassroots, because it's going to take an inclusive and politically empowered grassroots movement in order to move the money, to cut the Pentagon budget, to protect manufacturing jobs and turn them into sustainable green jobs. So I'm going to talk a little bit, spend a little bit of time about the logic. Really not just the logic, actually the logic and the emotional underbelly of the Move the Money training. Because to be an effective trainer, especially doing a day-long training, you have to connect with the soul of the message of the training, of each section, and understand how we're trying to move people to become more committed, more engaged, and to skill up, frankly. So we want to use the Move the Money trainings to strengthen relationships between organizations. We want to, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. Strengthen relationships. Oh, goodness. Build on participants' experience and knowledge. We want to build up skills, thinking, and relationships to expand our organizing capacity. We want to build up what the Marines call situational awareness, understanding the big picture, relating it to everyday reality, and discussing what we can do to change, to make change, to bring up, organize for change. And we want to build up a new set of tactics. We introduced some new tools for the Move the Money from the Pentagon to back to our communities movement, and we hope these new tactics and tools will advance the current organizing that participants are already engaged in. We want people in this opening section to get to know not only who's in the room, but also what the political time of day is. And we want to get the participants to buy in to building the Move the Money movement. You know, on one hand, we want to inspire people in the opening, but on the other hand, we want to create an atmosphere that encourages team building, that encourages people to think outside the narrow concerns of their own organization and think about building the movement together. Now, when we move into that section that Joe described of going over the federal budget, drilling down into the specifics of the Pentagon budget, we're talking big picture. Frankly, we've had the experience where we have had union organizers who've been actively engaged in lobbying Congress against budget cuts on the domestic side, who never heard the fact that 55% of discretionary spending goes to the Pentagon. And so when we start to make the transition to drill down on the Pentagon budget, be careful not to get lost in the weeds. There's a lot of details, but we really want people to feel that they're going to have many times to go back to the resource materials in order to kind of skill up on the Pentagon budget. We quickly, though, after that initial kind of brain dump, we quickly move into fears, myths, and a harsh reality. First, we go into that section called the elephants because, frankly, facts are not always enough to deal with the fears and the myths that the opposition drums up. And frankly, if facts could win the day, people would not drive drunk, right? People wouldn't smoke cigarettes. So facts aren't necessarily enough. We also use a racial equity lens to go a little bit deeper into the overall federal budget and the impact of a militarized federal budget on communities of color. Now, we're all a part of the 99%, but very importantly, not everybody is affected by the kind of budget cuts that are coming down in our communities. And people of color, communities of color, we really need to look at their reality, our realities, in a different way. And so that section of the curriculum is very detailed, very directed, because we think it's a difficult but a critical discussion to have. Joe talked about the Jeopardy game. And frankly, we are putting a lot of facts and figures out there, a lot of new ideas about how to handle the fears and the myths about cutting the Pentagon budget. But you got to use it or you're going to lose it by the end of the day. So that's why we decided a Jeopardy game would reinforce the facts, but also kind of lighten up the atmosphere, have a little fun. And then we go into making the argument. This great debate section is really about putting the facts into a very compelling, emotional appeal to move the money. Because as I said, facts don't always win the day. They have to be packaged to appeal to people's thinking, the everyday realities that people face. The final section, that last 60 minutes, is really about planning for the future and exploring the 3 tracks of the Move the Money: organizing, congressional pressure, local organizing, and grassroots public popular education. And we spend that last hour examining the political and economic realities locally, and we go into more detail about the organizing that is already underway and the upcoming opportunities. And then we spend a chunk of time brainstorming possible new initiatives that will bring the various groups and movements together to maximize the pressure on Congress to think of new ways to engage local state officials through either state bills or other defense industry transition initiatives, or public education through local resolutions or a referendum. By the end, we hope that people see that this training has actually created a new beginning. Of course, as Joe said, we try to improve. Every time we do the training, we try to improve through a critique and an evaluation. But really, what we're trying to do is to give people the tools to go into their communities and to begin to raise the level of thinking as well as action. And by the end, we hope, not only with the materials that they take home, but by the end, we hope that we are able to help people affirm their faith and their commitment to building the Move the Money movement. And many times when we're planning these Move the Money trainings, we've done already, I think, 6. I think it's 6. And we're moving on to, no, we've done 5, and I think we're moving on to 6 or 7. Every time that we do them, we find that we learn new things about how to improve the training, but that people are really interested in taking what they know, their experiences, the current work that they're doing, and help it become a part of a bigger movement to change national spending priorities. So organize and Move the Money training. I know most of you are organizers, and we need, though, for every organization who decides to do this training to take stock of their work as an organization or a network or a coalition and clarify what your goals are going forward, and ask yourself the question as to whether or not you need to deepen the content of your work and refine your strategy and tactics. And if the answer is yes, then do the Move the Money training in your community. We, as we have said, are hoping that the Move the Money trainings can help strengthen relationships between organizations and movements, improve the skills of organizers, and create a new context to explore new initiatives. So it is very important to think about, number one, co-hosting a Move the Money training with an organization that you want to work more or are working closely with. Create an invite list where you start with the groups you're already working with, and then you think through the constituencies who are engaged in federal or local budget struggles, and then go beyond and make sure that you have a representative, inclusive grouping of organizations and organizers, because that's the kind of movement that's going to be able to move the money and change national spending priorities. And we think it's really important that you choose a training location that will encourage labor, people of color, young people, and women to participate. For example, In Connecticut, we were hosted by the Connecticut Council of Machinists in their union hall, and it was significant because in Connecticut it's one of the highest concentrations of aerospace industry and production. And so we had people there who actually work on nuke subs, who actually work on the F-35. And we think having it in that union hall made it seem like a natural thing to do, to come to a Move the Money training because it's part of the ongoing work in order to ensure that jobs that have been dependent on defense contracts actually can be protected through moving the money and creating good, sustainable green manufacturing jobs to replace them. I did not move the slide ahead, but now I am. The importance of being inclusive and making the list, making sure the age, gender, and racial representation are good because it'll make for a much better discussion and debate. But the main thing about getting people to participate is following up with a solid conversation or a meeting that goes into detail about why groups should consider sending their organizers and what value added they could get from being in this day-long training, but also what kind of contribution that group or organization will make in strengthening the conversation about the work going forward, because we're building a movement. We have a draft e-vite. It will be up on the website, but the main thing about these e-vites, when you send it out to individuals that you are hoping will participate in the Move the Money training, you really need to add a local narrative about some of the key issues that people are organizing and struggling on in the community. Our goals as facilitators, well, this is the final section on facilitation. So we want to give you some tips and give you an insight into some of the pitfalls that we have encountered in doing the Move the Money training. And of course, our goal as facilitators is to help participants share their experiences, provide a framework to integrate new information or insights on the problem and the solution, and we want to support participants as they explore new ideas and refine their own point of view. Boiled down, we want to create an atmosphere that encourages people to think out loud. And, you know, some of the tips, pretty straightforward. You know, be clear in each section what the purpose and the goals are, prepare ahead of time, and basically, in doing this training, you spend a lot more time in some ways preparing than you do doing the training itself, because it's very important to know the information, understand the logic, and find ways to present the materials in a way that is compelling. And we can't emphasize enough how important it is to have at least 2 co-facilitators. The materials that Joe referenced are there. There are handouts, but it's really important for the small group exercises to either use the handout or to write the information up on the butcher paper. We found that handouts are best for the small group exercises. Use a timer, stick to the time limits, because we really need that last hour to be the full 60 minutes for that kind of strategic planning and discussion and planning for the future. Obviously, you should always try to face forward, don't turn your back on the crowd, and arrange the chairs and the tables in a circle so that everybody can see one another and can hear one another. Really, more heads are better than one, so you should have a team of at least 2 facilitators. And the most important tip I can give you is take a chill pill. Roll with the process. Enjoy. Have some fun with it. The Move the Money training, you know, is on one level pretty rigorous when you're getting into the facts and figures on the budget, but a large part of it is spending time encouraging conversation, trying out the information. Now, for some down and dirty tips. Don't be afraid to stick to the goals. And sometimes participants may want to go off on a tangent. Stick to the goals because we'll have a better outcome in the training. Number 2, we lay out a number of ground rules, like turning off cell phones, and step up, step back, encouraging people to participate who usually sit back, and encouraging those who are very talkative to give other people the space to participate. The one ground rule that is most often broken, though, is one voice. Everybody speaking, being able to be heard, one person speaking at a time. But I really encourage you to encourage the participants to add their own ground rules so that people kind of share a sense of ownership of the success of the day. Facilitators, trainers are basically air traffic controllers. You don't want anyone to go off the runway. You want to avoid verbal collisions, and definitely be clear for when you need to take off and begin flight. So there are 4 possible mid-air, near misses, and how to handle them. Number 1, sometimes you have people who are overly talkative, eager beavers, show-offs, or just plain talkative. When one person, if one person begins to kind of monopolize the large group discussions, when that person stops for a breath, say, interesting point, what do others think? Or let's hear from someone else. Number 2, another down and dirty tip, if you have a Debbie or a Dan Downer, a person who has a lot of pet peeves or likes to gripe, the best way to handle that, acknowledge that there are difficulties that we all face, and lift up the fact that together we may be able to find a way to address their concerns. But it's important to kind of nip that in the bud. Number 3, personality clashes between participants. We haven't really had this, but I've been in other trainings where it has happened. And sometimes those kind of personality classes, because there are real differences of opinions that get heated up, or sometimes just familiarity breeds irritation. I think the best way to handle it is to applaud their intense feelings. Feeling strongly and passionate is a good thing in organizing, but to encourage people and ask to focus on solutions and to try to find a point of agreement and pivot to a question to the whole group. Because in handling any kind of situation in a group, you always want to draw the entire group into solving whatever problem arises. So those are some of the down and dirty tips on how to handle being an air traffic controller. I will just end with this. One of the big lessons I learned from preparing for this training of trainers is kind of thinking through the good, the bad, and the ugly of flip charting. You know, we spend a lot of time talking in large groups that leads into small groups, and it is really important to scribe some of the main points that are being discussed. It's very important because when you're scribing on a flip chart and everybody can see, it validates what people say. It reduces the amount of repetition and interruption because people will see that their point has already been made. It promotes interaction because participants can see a point, think about it, and respond and interact with a point that's already been made. And it helps to direct the conversation, see where it's been and helps the facilitator see where we need to go in facilitating the conversation. The bad of flip charting is, you know, if we don't do effective flip charting, clear flip charting and scribing along the way, it's really hard to synthesize people's comments. And there are a number of large group discussions where you need to synthesize what's been said over, 15, 20, 10-minute period. You need to synthesize in order to move to the next exercise or small group. The ugly, let me just say what not to do when scribing or flip charting. And when facilitating, do not constantly rephrase what people are saying. Sometimes you need to do that to clarify what people are saying. But you basically want to capture the essence of what people say in a conversation. And it's really important. Do not make a laundry list of comments or what people are saying with no clear connection. It's important to scribe in defined categories and trying to bring comments together that are related so that people can see the different subject areas that were covered in a conversation. And lastly, while facilitating, do not ask multiple questions at once because it's really hard to scribe. And it's really hard for people to respond. So use flip charts and scribing to focus the discussion, and use each chat, each time you are chatting the conversation, to build towards the goals of the training overall and the specific section you're in. So I will end with this. The main tip for the trainers and facilitators of this training is to take a chill pill and enjoy, because everyone who participates, as well as the facilitators and trainers, will learn something new in the day-long training where we're working together and discussing some of the most important issues that we have to deal with in building the movement to move the money from wars and the Pentagon to fund jobs in human services.
Thank you so much, Judith, and thank you, Joe. I know our audience has a lot of questions, so I just want to remind everyone how to submit your questions. There is a question panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You can type those questions in, and then I'll read them out loud to Joe and Judith. Well, I'm going to kick it off since I have the mic and ask the first question. So Joe and Judith, I'm wondering, you mentioned as you've been doing these trainings, learning and growing and kind of tweaking the curriculum. So I'm wondering what your top 3 best practices are. I guess I'll pass that one to Joe first and then to Judith.
Oh, really good question, Utsi. Let's see. I think from our perspective at NPP, top best practice is to never assume that folks are current with either the Pentagon debate in Congress or current with some of the vernacular that we use, the difference between mandatory and discretionary spending. We can lose folks there if we're not careful. So never assume. Always check in, know your audience. The second best practice, I think, is to make it as local as possible. That's one of the things that we strive for at NPP, and we've seen that in these trainings, if we can help people understand why the heck they should care about the Pentagon budget, from their perspective as a mom in a local community, or as Judith said, a labor leader, or someone in a community of faith, if we can really help bring it home, we actually have done a better job, and we find that folks are much more deeply engaged if they're new to this issue. And I think the third one is be nimble. I've been moved. I haven't been out on the road as much as some of my colleagues and certainly Judith with these trainings. But what I've noticed is that people are going to come with questions. They're going to come with ideas. They're going to come with things that they have to get accomplished in the training. And so the extent to which we can be nimble and weave them in and think on our feet and draw up either data or tools or some examples to help really galvanize and bolster either their suggestion or their question, I think we do them a service. Because really we're all in it for the folks in our local communities. Those are 3 best practices.
So Joe covered the 3 best, and I'll just pile on with 3 more. It's very important to be up to date and familiar with the current political situation. For example, if you were doing the training this weekend, you would need to know some nitty-gritty details about what is going on in Congress as we speak, where the votes on the amendments to the National Defense Authorization Act is going on, and what your congressional reps said or what they did, how they voted, what that means. It's very important to be up to date on the national political as well as the local political situation. It will give your opening a timely, urgent character when you set, the political time of day. And the second thing is, as my grandma always said, real life. You know, real life. That's what you learn from examples, using examples as you go along and making it personal. I mean, I think facilitation and training is really a lot of building up a sense that you've been there, because we all have. And most of us who are on this call are activists and organizers and are very committed. So we have a lot of examples we can utilize. And lastly, humor. Please, please don't be dour. Don't be afraid to poke fun at yourself or anybody else who you think has a thick skin.
Can I jump in with a fourth? I love Judith. Can I jump in with a fourth?
Oh, absolutely.
One of the things that we hear a lot, both at Peace Action and NPP, is that folks feel like they don't have enough information to become trainers or take on this issue. And I guess I would say that as a facilitator who certainly has been in front of terrific communities where I haven't had the answer, in addition to Judith's, don't be afraid to have a good time and use humor and personal stories, actually don't be afraid to say, boy, I don't know. I don't know, actually, the answer to that, but I'm going to find out. And bookmark it. Maybe you create a facilitation tool like a parking lot where you can bookmark people's questions, on a sheet, or a bike rack, as some people are calling it now. So you can go back to those questions, either having a moment to get on MPP site and look up the information that you need, or potentially it's more complicated than that, so you're going to need to do some thinking about it. But it's okay. It shouldn't stop you. We can't actually answer all the questions before us in these complicated political times. So it's okay just to say you don't know. It's better, in fact, to say you don't know than to potentially offer the wrong answer. And again, those of us who have been doing this training for a very, very long time are still confronted with many questions that, befuddle us, and that's okay.
And just for transparency's sake, I was supposed to stop about halfway through my rant to take questions. So
all right. Well, speaking of, our next question is from Florindo Tronsoletti, and forgive me if I mispronounced that. Florindo asks, how do we respond to an invitee who cares about the issue but feels that the situation is futile, that their actions can't make a difference because the systemic problems are hopelessly intractable?
Such an unbelievably exquisite question. We get that question all the time. And here's, what you could actually answer is, or answer with or address that with, is actually what just happened. Think for a moment, all of us, about what's happening regarding the overseas contingency operation or war budget, or otherwise known as slush fund. That was, up until a couple of months ago, a sacred budget item, not subject to sequestration, not subject to scrutiny, certainly not subject to public debate. And it's one of the things that has really been the escape hatch, if you will, or the safety valve for the Pentagon. It's allowed the Pentagon to escape any kind of significant budget cut in 2014, unlike domestic social spending. And some orgs got a hold of it. NPP crunched some numbers, and then Peace Action piled on, and U.S. Action, and The Nation, and Credo, and Roots Action, and a significant number piled on to this analysis and said, hey, wait a minute. The National Defense Authorization Act is coming up, and we have to do something about it. This is not okay, whether we're slightly center or slightly conservative or slightly left. And either way, there are people who piled onto this issue from a fiscal stewardship or a transparency issue, or really to from more of a peace and security perspective of cutting Pentagon spending. And in this National Defense Authorization Act, we're seeing that the overseas contingency operation is moving inside the budget. So it wouldn't be a separate add and stir, if you will. It's going to be subject to the same rules as the baseline Department of Defense. And in the same National Defense Authorization Act, we see people offering amendments to actually end the OCO altogether. So there's a whole continuum of response. And Congress didn't do that out of the goodness of its heart. Most of the congressional members, some did, of course. They did that because their constituents said, hey, enough with funding the war budget, or having a war budget, period, and enough with it being outside and not subject to the same rules that everybody else has to play by. That was a significant victory for anyone concerned. Again, across the political spectrum, anyone concerned with Pentagon spending had a win with the OCO. So it can be done. We just have to be sharp about our timing and our strategy and continue to move this forward. So I would say it's tough, and we all have these terrible moments, and we're seeing in real time a big old win.
And I would add that it's a good question, Florendo, because we talked about this after we finished our North Carolina training last week, and we know a full day is a big commitment for any activist or organizer, especially when it's on the weekend, right? And we were thinking that perhaps we needed to add a section on the theory of change, because this training is premised on the idea that movements make change. Individuals play a role, no doubt, but all the big, long-lasting, far-reaching changes that have been made all through history have been because there were politically empowered grassroots movements that swung into action. And I think that I wish we had a longer time for the training so that we could add that conversation at the beginning, because maybe it is a presumption, false presumption, but I think that we have to find different ways to kind of build as a thread and using examples, and that movements make the change, and the stronger, the more inclusive, the broader the movement, the more possible it is to push back on the opposition. Eisenhower talked about this back when he was president, that there were these entrenched interests who were going to take over control of the economy and politics, culture, and spirituality really in the country. And it's been many decades since the military-industrial complex has built up that power that President Eisenhower talked about. So it's going to take us a while to build up a movement that is strong enough to reverse what has taken decades to develop, in the sense of who decides, who really does decide the national spending priorities. So I think we've just got to keep beating that drum, that movements make the change, and if we build it, the movement to move the money, then we'll succeed in the longer run.
Thank you. Can you give us some more tips for building relationships with potential co-hosts?
Well, I could give you an example from the Connecticut training, which is really, really interesting and uplifting, because it was decided by the labor leaders and peace groups that had worked on the state bill that was passed last May to create a futures commission, or a commission to map out a defense industry transition plan for the state, to recommend some steps that could be taken to protect manufacturing jobs in Connecticut. And because it was labor leaders and a peace group who were working together to invite groups, there was a beautiful cross-section, a local elected official, an environmental activist, faith-based groups, someone from the teachers union, some actual commissioners from the Connecticut Futures Commission that are engaged in this project in Connecticut. But the co-hosts, I think, increase the possibility of a very inclusive and broad representation of participants. That's the key to the success of the training, bringing all the different movements and organizations together to think together around the same table about our common problem. Although we may be taking that problem on from different angles, as I said earlier, the trade unionists who'd been lobbying on the domestic side of the budget had really never thought about the relationship of the Pentagon budget and this 55% that goes to the Pentagon. So we need to use the co-hosting idea to not only increase the inclusive and broad representation in the training, but also as facilitators, because then you can bring in different examples, and when you have co-facilitators from different organizations, I think it will also spice up the content.
Agreed.
Thank you. And I guess following up on that question, how do you balance everyone's sort of agenda during the training? For example, a state legislator might want to push the training towards talking about bills, whereas a peace activist might want to push it in a different direction. So how do you handle that and balance, everyone's different priorities in the midst of doing the training?
Well, I think that the curriculum kind of, the way that it's structured, it balances things out because we cover a lot of ground, and we use, it's pretty fast-paced between large group discussion, small group exercises, reporting back from the small groups into the larger groups, synthesizing that and moving on. It's very fast-paced, and so one issue or one person who wants to drive one agenda really doesn't have time to get a toehold in the conversation because we really are trying to move to that, to my way of thinking, that last 60 minutes is like, go time. That's when we figure out whether or not people have been able to take in the facts, take in some of the ways, the tactics and the ways to address fears and myths, whether or not they've been able to take in other people's experiences and concerns and initiatives that are being tried or underway. So really the curriculum does it, keeps us on track.
I totally agree with Judith, and I would say that because we worked with some really terrific thinkers around participatory curriculum development, we came from the premise that, in fact, we needed all participants to be meaningfully engaged, meaning that we need people's particular expertise to come out in order to weave the total story about what's actually going on, either with the Pentagon or with their local community. And so there's a lot of opportunities throughout the curriculum for people to take significant leadership. And as Judith said, it moves along at a fast clip, but they can take significant leadership, and we can weave in their own ideas, their concerns, their frustrations, their seizing of opportunities, and it actually just makes the training better. So people feel like they're being heard and they're contributing to something much larger than themselves, which is, of course, what we all hope to do.
Thank you. Our next question is from Alice Wujiak, and Alice, please forgive me if I butchered that. And Alice is wondering if you could demonstrate some of the training, such as the Jeopardy game and how the budget is presented.
Oh, sure. I wonder if Jasmine can get unmuted, because this might be very fun. So, Alice, can we ask you a question, a follow-up question? Are you looking to see the Jeopardy slides themselves, or are you looking to see the PowerPoint that we might do at the top of the training? If we could get a little greater clarification, I'm sure we could have some fun.
All right, we'll give Alice a minute to respond. But maybe, Joe, in the meantime, could you walk us through sort of the budget part of the presentation? I know that's something that you've done for us in a very kind of abbreviated way on webinars.
Sure. Let me just pull it up, Adzi, and then we can share my screen. And I'm happy to do it.
Sure, whenever you're ready.
Sure. I'm just pulling it up now. Let's see. And Alice, feel free to help refine this so that Judith and I can do something that's a little bit more close to what you had in mind. Okay. So if Jasmine's on mute, Jasmine, maybe you can also chime in. This would be terrific. So one of the things, we start with this basic premise. So this is just a 101 look at the Pentagon. And in NPP's idea of Pentagon spending, we think of it as baseline military spending, all money spent on war, nuclear weapons, which we strip out of the Department of Energy, foreign military aid, overseas military base construction. So that's our...
So before you go any farther, we're not seeing your screen just yet.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. Oh, Adzi, bless you. So here it is. So that's how we think of Pentagon. And so we come at it, again, from this very, very elemental place. We start first actually helping people unpack where their last year's tax dollars went. So they've just done this very participatory exercise where they've, some of you will know, the classic penny poll, where people are actually invited to, I think they have all power in the world, and they can just allocate one of their federal income tax dollars, and they use dots, and we have it all set up for them. Again, this is all the materials are there for you. And it's a very rich discussion, and so we begin to unpack that. Where did they want to spend their 2013, in this case, income tax dollars? And we do that before we show them this bar chart, which actually is to the penny, where they actually spent, where our nation spent their federal income tax dollars. And there's a moment here to unpack what people are thinking about this. Do they have questions? Do they have feelings? We often will point out that, in fact, this is not veterans' benefits in this 27 cents of every dollar. To this military, this Pentagon category, veterans are an additional 5.1 cents. We talk about that being a very rapidly growing piece of the budget, veterans, for a lot of the reasons we might be able to intuit on this call. We talk about the fact that that's also not the Pentagon's share of interest on the federal debt. So, when we start to stack those things up, people get a sense of just the impact over time of this quite a disproportionate investment of our nation in this sector. People will want to, they'll want to unpack 2 cents for education, for example, and they'll want to hear from us that, in fact, yes, it is every dollar spent on education is equal to 2 cents of each of our federal income tax dollars, and that's every Pell Grant dollar, every Head Start, every Title I, every grant to a community college. So it's actually this tiny, tiny bit of our federal budget devoted to something like education. They'll also these days want to talk about energy and the environment, because, of course, climate change is on everybody's mind. And so they'll want to talk about the fact that this is every dollar to the federal national parks. This is every dollar for renewable energy research and development, and on and on. And in your packet, you'd have a category sheet, so you could tell where, in fact, we've put all of these programs so that you can help your constituents know that. So we're building your capacity to understand what goes into these individual buckets in our federal budget analysis. And then we actually tried again, as Judith was saying, go from a very personal place. What's at stake for us as individuals? Who's winning and who's losing? Meaning, how are we directly affected? And this whole training is geared to what we can do. So we go first to this very, very bird's eye view. We call this the money in, money out. This is the proposed budget of President Obama. And actually, we start with the very top line numbers, $3.97 trillion. That's a lot of money. And how are we going to make it as a nation, and how are we going to spend it? And we start here by saying that lots of people want to talk about tax reform, and so we should as a nation. But we don't talk about tax reform necessarily in this presentation or in this webinar. This really is about spending priorities, and we're going to focus on largely military, almost exclusively military, which sits squarely, 99% of it sits in the discretionary budget, which means that it has to be proposed and debated and authorized every single solitary year, which is why we're so powerful as constituents in our nation. And so this is the blueprint. And then, here, depending on the audience, we can talk about the fact that the Ryan budget will have a different idea of money in, money out. That would actually bring less money in and more money out in, less money in because of tax policy and more money out in terms of Pentagon spending, or the Congressional Progressive Caucus budget, which brings more money in and much less money out in terms of Pentagon. And we have all of those resources for you at NPP. Jasmine did a side-by-side of these, and that's one of our core products every year. And then we talk about the fact that one of the reasons that we care about Pentagon spending is the fact that in fact it not only is it our tax dollars leaving our states and going to the federal budget, but that it has this incredibly personal, visceral impact on us and the well-being of our communities and ourselves. And so we have, again, for you, we'll have these very local numbers about how federal budget spending comes down to us as individuals. And this actually is premised on the fact that every single federal dollar has a personal impact, and every single federal dollar creates a job, either directly or indirectly. And so we often get stuck in Pentagon spending conversations to say, well, there's so many jobs at stake, and in fact there are. And the women and men who serve the nation and the defense contractors, they want to feed their families just like everybody else. And but it's somehow we're locked in this failure of imagination to imagine an economy other than the one we have. And so to help people understand the fact that federal spending is in our midst every second of every day helps them see the complexity, that it's not just about Pentagon spending in states that keep states afloat. There's housing dollars. There's medical-related dollars. There's education-related dollars. And there's direct spending in terms of Medicare, Social Security, and on and on. And then we go to a little bit of a backstory, where we've been. And this is because we want to make sure that people actually get the fact that, this is maybe going to the really good question about frustration, that, we're going to try the best we can, but there have been these, especially this past decade, where we've been really off the rails, as we say. And one of the reasons, our theory at MPP is one of the reasons that can happen, that Congress can go so desperately awry, is that we don't know enough as participants in this democracy to hold them accountable. So we illustrate the very many ways that there have been these difficulties, and we say, but we're going to move together as a nation to be informed constituents of our congressional members, and therefore when they're in the middle of this lockdown or hijinks, we're going to be able to call them out and hold them accountable. We're going to shine that sunlight and help clean it up. And then we talk about how we spend the money. And of course, this is the big pie, this $3.97 trillion proposed in fiscal year 2015. And that one piece, that discretionary spending piece, that's a third of the budget. That's roughly where it's been for many years now. And that's still $1 trillion of your tax dollars. And so we help people see that piece as expanded into this pie, where many people have never seen this pie before, even though we might think, those of us on this call, that it's rather ubiquitous and everybody knows the story. They don't actually know the story, and they certainly don't know that this discretionary spending is funded out of this thing called the federal fund, which is where your tax dollars go. And they don't know that individuals are the major investors in the nation. And so it is our tax dollars fueling these spending priorities. And so to connect them there like that, again, helps invest all of us in why we both have the right and responsibility to speak up if these priorities don't match our vision for our nation. And then from there, so that's how we're going to spend the money. We look at, actually, we go back to Judith's idea about the theory of change. We go back in this line chart, which is rather a breathtaking line chart. I'm a wonk, as you can tell, but it is, for me, breathtaking. And the most breathtaking is really 1976, because in that moment, and it wasn't by accident, domestic investment outpaced military investment. And that was because of the civil rights movement and the women's movement and the young people's movement and the war on poverty. There was real organizing, and that's what we're igniting here, thanks to you all, with these trainings and with our national partners across the country. We're saying, what's it going to take to fulfill the promise of our nation? What's our vision for how our investment, our tax dollars should be spent? And so we show them this line chart to show them just the different pivotal moments. So we have this 1976 moment. We have the 1981 moment, and we actually know what happened there, right? We created, in many ways, an an enemy in the Soviet Union, and we just totally jacked up military spending, and we began to see again, because of increased revenue and some social movements, in the intersection of those lines, and then again the terrible tragedy of September 11th. And we can see at the end of this, the story is yet written about these two lines, but in fact we see that they're beginning to move apart again after they started to come together, and that's because of things like the overseas contingency operation being so unwieldy, and that again provoked this movement to take that back. And so from this line chart we move to some annualized costs. We're not talking entirely about the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but I think it's important for people to understand that it's $1.75 trillion, and a lot of that contributed to the debt, especially during the Bush administration, that we're still paying in Iraq for soldiers to remain there. And then this gets, of course, to some of the concerns that people might have about the cost of the Afghanistan war. Troop levels have decreased about 39%, and yet we're not seeing the same kind of decrease in Afghanistan war spending. So why is that? What's going on? And that might lead you down to a conversation, as it did in North Carolina, rather, around privatization, some of the costs associated with Pentagon's choices to privatize some of its work. And so from there, we actually talk about another elephant or myth that's around that we need to spend this much money because, in fact, unless we do, we're going to be outspent by people across the world. And in fact, we know that that's uncategorically false. Or it is, we spend more than the next 10 nations combined. And of course, we've in a handout which you have in the training packet, we actually look at that also by NATO allies, and non-NATO allies, and it becomes actually, frankly, nearly absurd when we look at it here. And there's a lot of misinformation out there about other global military spending, and so we spend a tiny bit of time looking at that. We also look at jobs, another elephant that will come up. So we give them a little bit of information before the elephant. It absolutely always comes up. We're afraid. We need to have jobs. We have high unemployment, and we agree. We need to have jobs. And this is, of course, this beautiful study by the Political Economy Research Institute, which WAND actually sparked. It's one of the best in the nation, and it looks at $1 billion of federal investment and what we get out. And I bet you those of you on the call, most of you have seen this study. But we talk about the kinds of jobs Perry's talking about here, the kinds of return on investment, say, for example, of this $1 billion being spent on education versus military, nearly triple the jobs. That's interesting. Why is that? And we talk a little bit about that. And then we talk about what we can do. So again, these 3 tracks, we try to keep people on these 3 tracks. We don't have to take on the nation all at once. We can start with a grassroots coalition to a local resolution, like they're doing in Minnesota. This is Minnesota ASAP, and they're doing library board resolutions or city council resolutions. Those are important still. They're building the national call to have a national conversation about this. Of course, the U.S. Conference of Mayors has really been taking the lead on this issue. So there's lots of opportunities at the local level. Of course, the state legislation that Judith talked about, there are these just unbelievable opportunities afoot in this area, and then, of course, nationally. And then we give them a preview of things that they're going to talk about later, which is that they're not alone if they want to tackle a defense transition scenario. There are grants available from the Office of Economic Adjustment or the Department of Labor, that there are these Plan B and or proactive planning monies available. Not enough, and it's not, it's the process is going to need a guide like Judith or Miriam Pemberton for folks, but thank goodness we have them, and Judith and Miriam, so we preview that, and then we move on. So that's the beginning. That's the beginning foundation.
And I would add, Alice, that it's a commitment to do this training, and the commitment requires that section, that PowerPoint that Joe so wonderfully described, whoever agrees to run the training has to spend as more than the amount of time it takes to do the PowerPoint. You have to spend studying the materials, the background materials, using the National Priorities Project website. You have to skill up, and that's a commitment. And I think it would be such a valuable contribution for any organization to designate one person who becomes like their person who can use that PowerPoint, take it to other organizations, use it, update it, and build like a local grassroots infrastructure of people who make it their thing to become as knowledgeable as possible about the federal budget, and drill down on the Pentagon budget, and to stay up to date, and to utilize the local numbers around, the interactive stuff that's on the website. And I also would say one other thing, and I'm not sure if we emphasize this enough, but this training is the critical contribution that the peace movement is making to the movement that is growing in this country for a just transition to a new economy. We are trying to lift up the fact that there are jobs at stake. There are jobs at stake when Head Start is cut. Teachers lose their jobs. There are jobs at stake if the Pentagon budget is cut. And there are now some new conversations based on some of the work that we're doing within the Pentagon budget campaign with the unions that represent the civilian employees at the Pentagon. And this also new avenue of meeting with and working with machinists and auto workers and those who are actually employed in producing the F-35 and nuke subs and armored vehicles, because they are the folks who are going to be able to figure out how we do make a transition, what can be done to actually protect and develop new green sustainable manufacturing jobs. So this training, and for organizations, peace groups or faith-based groups or groups that are doing economic justice work, this training actually helps people enter into that new movement and the new thinking around a just transition to a new economy that works for all. And that's how we see the contribution. And therefore, if you get someone in your organization who's willing to commit to learn how to run that PowerPoint, it can make a big difference in any community in this country and the kind of infrastructure and movement building that we're able to do going forward.
And I would just add, I totally agree with Judith, and I would just add, my heavens, NPP is there for you. I mean, it's, you are all, you're why we work. You're why we do what we do. We don't crunch the numbers or put these PowerPoints together so that they sit on a shelf. We love getting out on the road with partners, and we'd love to build your capacity to do this effectively. And so we're just an email or a call away in terms of just a coaching opportunity. Absolutely true. Or a piece of research.
And maybe I should say at this point that we are NPP and Peace Action are committed to doing the training in as many states as possible. We did 3 trial runs, one in Maryland, one in Washington State, and one in Ohio. We are currently in the next phase of trainings. We just did one in Connecticut, one in North Carolina. Our next 2 in the next 2 weeks will be in Wisconsin and Ohio. The goal of those trainings is to bring together a statewide collaboration, maybe not a new coalition, maybe not a new network, but bringing together peace, faith-based, labor, communities of color, economic, racial justice groups together to talk about this new situation we're in, which is we can't afford to lose any more jobs in our communities. And secondly, there are tools and things that we can do very locally with our state legislatures, with city councils, and in conjunction with workers and local elected officials and economic planners in our communities because of the Office of Economic Adjustment Grants, which create, again, a public engagement tool of a commission bringing people together, all the stakeholders, to make a plan for when, because it's going to happen that the Pentagon budget will be cut and jobs may be lost. So, you know, we are very excited and we're prepared to come to your area to run the training, but we're also prepared to help you learn how to run the training as well. And we're hoping, and we know that a number of people on the call have already been through the training, and so this is their second or next step in utilizing the curriculum to learn how to run it themselves, use segments and at different events or conferences that are going on. So we're in it for the long haul. We're in it to win it.
Thank you. Just one more clarifying question. Judith, you mentioned a just transition. Can you explain a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Well, this is a very popular global term, actually, of discussing the nature of reforms and the need for radical reforms to the global economy and to our national economy because of the climate crisis, because of the continuing deepening economic crisis in our communities, and because we do need to fight for the rightful role of government in taking care of the needs of the country and of the community. And so we're talking about, and there are many labor, environmental, climate justice groups, economic justice groups who are talking about a new paradigm, kind of a new way of looking at the economy from the local grassroots up, making proposals and building a movement that can, you know, ultimately change the nature of the economy to work for everyone. It's my opinion that the federal government is the biggest kind of pot of cash in our country that could begin to make this transition and make the changes that are needed to address the climate crisis, to address the crisis in education, to address the joblessness crisis. So a just transition is kind of shorthand that's been developed globally as a way to talk about some radical reforms that are needed to meet the needs of the people.
Well, thank you so much, Joe and Judith. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add.
I don't think so. No, except just you know, abiding gratitude to Wand and you, Udzi, and everybody for spending this period of time with us. It's a real honor.
And we hope that you'll, if you haven't already, download the curriculum, take a look at it, give us a call. If you live in Ohio or Wisconsin, we're coming your way. We're going to be in Wisconsin May 31st at the Labor Temple in Madison, and on June 7th at Communication Workers of America's Union Hall in Columbus. If you know people there, you should put them in contact with us. They need to be at this training. We're very excited. We have a good group of local organizers from a number of different organizations, including WAND and Friends Committee on National Legislation, U.S. Labor Against the War, the New Priorities Network, Progressive Democrats of America, of course, Peace Action, who are working together to put these trainings together. And if you are interested in hosting us to come to help you build, you know, statewide entities, especially in the states of, we're looking for folks in Washington and in New Hampshire and in Georgia. Let us know, and you know, we'll make arrangements.
Well, I just wanted to echo your thanks, Judith and Joe and Jasmine. We appreciate your time this evening for making this curriculum digestible and for making the budget accessible as always. And Joe, I just wanted to say thank you so much. We'll miss you, and we are looking forward to working with you in your new role. But thank you so much for all you've added to this community in the past 6 years.
Oh, you're very kind.
Amen.
And with that, we'll end the webinar, and thank you again. Everybody have a nice evening.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.